Calling all units, calling all units. Donut Shop has a fresh dozen. Go ahead and take a 1040.
So now moving forward, there's going to be a new sheriff in town, as we like to say. I don't know who's we. But so can you tell us, man, 60 years, we have not had a sheriff in Miami-Dade County.
Right.
All right. And with that, I just want to put some stuff out there. If you look at Miami-Dade County's police's badge, they go as a police department first. You want to explain that?
Yeah, so there's 67 counties in the state of Florida.
Okay.
Historically, all 67 have a duly elected sheriff, which means that the people elect their head of agency, right? And the difference between that and a police department is that a police department reports to city or county government, right? So either a city manager or a mayor elects the police chief, and generally, that's the way it runs. What ended up happening here is in the 1960s, there was some grand jury indictments, and the sheriff of Miami-Dade was found to be corrupt. I mean, and we're talking about systemic corruption. We're going to use the word systemic. Yeah. It was everywhere.
Okay.
Right? It was all over the ranks. And so at the time, he obviously went to jail. They couldn't risk having an undetected corrupt officer run for office and potentially win and continue this cycle. So what they ended up doing was they said, no, we got to bring somebody from the outside, somebody who's got no ties to Miami, knows nobody here, and is going to come over here and clean up the department.
Yeah.
And they did. And they brought in a guy who did that, and that structure remained intact through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s, which is when I became a cop, then through the 2000s. And then in, I think it was 2018, it was put on a ballot. And the question was, should we go back to a duly elected sheriff structure? And the reason why, I mean, I remember the talks back then, we were a little concerned because we're like, anybody can run for this. Like, you don't have to have a,
right.
What if just, I don't know, an example, somebody with a big Instagram following, just for the sake of it, because he fought yesterday, Jake Paul.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
The social media.
I thought you were going to say me.
No, it could be you. It could be you. But see, you have law enforcement experience.
Yeah.
Right. And
You'd be better qualified than Jake Paul.
For sure.
Congratulations.
I'm not putting my name in the hat.
But what I mean by that is anybody with a strong social media following could
Yes.
potentially get elected, and what happens?
Yeah.
Right. And so, so they decided that we need to go back to an elected sheriff so that there's no political influence, because the system lends itself to the idea that, the mayor can control what happens in the department.
That was going to be one of my questions, but you can continue.
Right. And so that's what the electorate voted on. It went, I think it was 56 or 58% here in Dade County, but I want to say it was 64% throughout the state.
Okay.
Right. And so here we are. The election is official, and here we are in the middle of the campaign.
So, and you kind of touched on it, but to narrow it down, what do you think is a more political position? Is a sheriff or a chief, meaning that their manager is essentially their boss. The city manager is their boss.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I don't think there's any scientific way to answer it, and here's why. Because there's politics in every company, private, public sector, nonprofits. There's politics everywhere, right? I think the issue with this office is that now we're not accustomed to having an elected sheriff that has to run a political campaign.
Right.
So from that perspective, it becomes political, right? But I think it's better answered by saying, I think it depends on who gets elected.
Yeah.
Right. Because so, for example, I'm not a politician. I'm not in this trying to gain power. I'm trying to assume responsibility, which are two different things. And I think all I'm concerned about is the crime rate and the safety of Miami-Dade County citizens. And so I'm looking at this as, forget about the fact that I'm elected. I have to go through the process to get elected. But all I'm really focused on is how are we going to keep this safe, right? How are we going to make it safe? How are we going to support the officers? How are we going to balance, community engagement, community involvement, community affairs with a police department that's out there trying to protect the community, right? And that's all I'm really concerned about. So I'm not trying to gain power. Or, that kind of thing.
And I think with that said, knowing both sides, I see people might not understand. Like the chief of police still has to answer to somebody, whereas the sheriff answers to the constituents, the people that voted him or her into that position. So it's a little bit different where people might say, oh, the sheriff that's a more political position. Not after you get elected, because after you get elected, your responsibility is to uphold what you promised to the community as you were running. Like, this is what I'm going to stand for. This is what I'm going to do. And they voted you in. You said you're going to do that, so you're going to do that. And you don't really have to answer to nobody but that. And it shows, if you look, there's a very big difference if you start keying in on this, on when you see news across the nation, you see news, and then you have a chief speak on something, then you have a sheriff speak, and just one of the great sheriffs up in Central Florida, Grady Judd, when he's like, well, why did you shoot him 49 times? It's like, well, because we ran out of bullets,
Yeah.
and no, that's what the constituents want up there. That's what they elected him, because they want a no nonsense. We don't tolerate crime. If there's somebody shooting at you, then then handle your business, and we're okay with you handling your business, according to policy or whatever. So that's what they want, and that's why he's able to speak like that. Now, if you see a chief that is elected, they're not appointed, not elected,
Right.
appointed, they might be a little more restricted and calculated on what they're saying, because they have to make sure that they're not going to piss somebody off.
Exactly.
So that's why I asked that question. And you being now in the position of running for sheriff, and you're starting out, you can maybe tell that story a little bit better than me just looking from the outside and say, well, it's probably this and probably that.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I say that the way I look at it is, it's not about power, it's about responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is directly what you said. I plan to be held responsible for decisions that I make or decisions that I don't make.
Yeah.
Where under the current structure, you can have a lot of levels. Like, if the police department does something, you got to remember right now, according to the charter, the mayor, the sitting mayor right now, is the de facto sheriff.
Okay.
She is the sheriff.
Yeah.
And she can run the department and however she wants, because she is the sheriff. It's up to her responsibility. So now what happens
With zero law enforcement, I don't know her background, but I would
well, yeah, that's the
zero
way
law enforcement.
the Constitution was written, or the charter was written.
Yeah.
That by default, she is the sheriff, or the sitting mayor. Forget about her for a second. The sitting mayor is the sheriff. So that's why they get to make decisions in the department. Now, the reason why that becomes significant is because if something goes wrong in a police department, the mayor can say, "Oh no, that was the police."
Yeah.
Because other mayors have been historically a little bit less involved in the department. She's actually pretty involved, and that's her style, right?
Yeah.
So, but you can go back and forth, and the blame game can occur. The way I look at it is, if I'm going to be the sheriff, hold me accountable for what it is, and I'm going to take full responsibility for what I did or for what I didn't do, right? And I think it's important, especially right now, because if you look around the country, look at all these cities and how they're becoming more lawless as we go. Weak policies and this anti-police sentiment just doesn't work. And I've said it before. It's not working in any of the other cities. It's not working in San Francisco. It's not working in Atlanta. It's not working in Chicago. And we got to protect Miami-Dade, because we got to make sure that we don't let it get to that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, that's why you're here, because we want to make sure you're not going to New York or Florida or
No.
California or
good sign.
LA or
Yeah,
Florida.
it's an important time for that, because we're kind of at a crossroads on which way we're going to go, and this election is going to be really pivotal on that.
Calling all units. Donut Shop has a fresh dozen. Go ahead and take a 1040.